Howdy, Rock Buds, it's Papa. Hope you guys are doing well. Happy January to you. Today we're going to talk about the geology and the geologic history of the Michigan Upper Peninsula, and along the way we'll also be talking about the geologic history of the Michigan Lower Peninsula because they're tied together, geologically speaking. This is by popular request from one of my wonderful Rock Buds. So, if this video is helpful to you guys, please subscribe. And thank you so much to all my most excellent subscribers. I'm so happy and so pleased that you guys prescribe to my channel. Subscribe to my channel. It makes me so happy. So here we go. The geologic history and the geology of the Michigan Upper Peninsula and the Lower Peninsula. So what is the Michigan Upper Peninsula and what is the Lower Peninsula for that matter? Here's the map that shows them both. They're kind of nestled in amongst the Great Lakes, and the red arrow points to the Upper Peninsula. And by the way, for all you guys like me who don't live anywhere near there, the big lake north of the Upper Peninsula is Lake Superior. Lake Michigan is to the left of the Lower Peninsula, and Lake Huron is to the right. In the lower right is Lake Erie, and just above that and not completely pictured is Lake Ontario. And between those two lakes is the famous Niagara Falls. Geologically speaking, we can divide the Upper Peninsula into a western part and an eastern part. The western part is underlain by the Canadian Shield, which we'll talk about soon, and the eastern part is part of the Michigan Basin and has the same geology as the Michigan Basin. What is the Canadian Shield? The Canadian Shield is made mostly of granite and granite gneiss, although there are other metamorphic rocks there as well, and it is the ancient core of North America, with varying ages up to about 3 billion years old, plus or minus. The big red blob here shows the location of the Canadian Shield. Most of it is in Canada, hence the name. And the yellow arrow points to the western Upper Peninsula part that is underlain by this most ancient rock. And here's some photos of the Canadian Shield for you guys to look at. Very pretty part of the world, with beautiful lakes and, I must say, beautiful rocks. And just for fun, here's a picture from my college freshman historical geology textbook showing a geologist walking on the Canadian Shield with a background of Cambrian rocks behind him. Brings back memories. Here's a funky map that may help explain better what the Canadian Shield is. Each one of those textures represents a big hunk of land crust that crashed in, adding its bulk to the ever-growing core of the continent. The red arrow points to the superior hunk, or craton as they call it. It is the oldest, about 3 billion years old, plus or minus, and the other ones surrounding it were added to it sequentially and are sequentially younger. Each one of these hunks was a crashing event due to subduction, and as we know, subduction creates and enlarges continents. Okay, Rock Buds, now let's take a deep dive back in time and look at the geologic history of these two interesting peninsulas. We're back about 1 billion years ago, and this is the supercontinent Rodinia. This was the supercontinent before our most recent supercontinent, Pangaea. And Rodinia is getting ready to rift apart. As part of this process, some rifts develop that are not successful in rifting the continent apart. We call these failed rifts. One of these failed rifts happened in the Great Lakes area, and it is called the Midcontinent Rift System. The red slashes in this picture show the extent of this rift. And even though this was a failed rift, it produced huge amounts of basalt lava. The same kind of eruptions are happening at the mid-Atlantic Ocean ridge where it intersects Iceland. So let's take a look, see what it would be like. As you know, this is a rifting center, and rifting centers produce never-ending piles of basaltic lava that create and expand the ocean. Except in the case of our Midcontinent rift that was a failed rift. You can see bunches of this lava now cooled into basalt rock at the Keweenaw Peninsula that sticks out into Lake Superior, and it is part of the Upper Peninsula. Some pictures of the Keweenaw basalt for your viewing enjoyment. All that basalt lava brought up with it tons of copper and iron that became a huge copper mining industry on the Upper Peninsula. Travel over to Kewanee National Historic Park, an old copper mining area, and you can find out all about copper mining. Like all basalt lava, this rift lava emitted gas, and as the lava cooled into basalt rock, it froze these gas bubbles, and they're called vesicles. And over millions of years, silica-laden water filled up these vesicles. And along with the silica came trace amounts of iron and other elements that gave gorgeous colors to the silica. Over time, the basalt eroded away, and these balls of silica rolled out and were tumbled and smoothed by the waters and the waves of the lakes. And they became, as you likely know, agates or aggies. Lake Superior has a lot of them, they say. Let's delight our eyes with a few of these beauties. And by the way, for those of us who can't rush up to Lake Superior, you can buy Aggies on Amazon. We have now come forward in time to the Ordovician time period and the Taconic Orogeny, also called the Taconian Orogeny. You probably recall that this is when the Taconic volcanic island chain was crashed into and sutured to the proto-North American continent. Intense pressure of this crash produced Himalayan-sized mountains, while it pushed the proto-North American continental crust into an upthrust bulge. Here's a highly technical explanation of the process. Here's the continent. Here's the island arc. Huge mountains. That would be the knuckles. But after it was all over, everything relaxed. Most of these combined continents began to fall back down and stretch and stretch and stretch. That created rift basins like that. Can you see that rift basin? lots of rift basins. I hope that was helpful. This process is called post-orogeny relaxation or block faulting. And it happens after just about every mountain building event. This resulted in a lot of shallow basins that were surrounded by these high spots that were former limestone-rich reefs that they call arches. And one of those super shallow basins was the Michigan Basin. Hey Rock Buds, during the time we're talking about, which was late Silurian time, it was a really hot, dry climate, and the ocean would rise and fill these shallow basins, and then it would go down and the water in the basins would be cut off from the rest of the ocean. The heat of the sun would evaporate the water from these shallow basins, leaving a layer of salt. Year upon year upon millennia upon millennia, this cycle happened over and over until you got 16,000 feet of salt deposits in this Michigan Basin. Tremendous. After all these layers of salt were deposited in the Michigan Basin and in other basins, the ocean rose again and a layer of limestone was added on top of the salt. Magnesium washed down from the Taconic Mountains and into the sea, combined with the limestone to form dolomite, also called dolostone, which is calcium magnesium carbonate, a much harder rock than limestone. This dolomite layer, called the Lockport Dolomite, completely covered over the salt, protecting and preserving the salt. And so today, the biggest salt mines on planet Earth are located deep beneath Lake Michigan and beneath Lake Huron. And not only did the Lockport Dolomite save the salt, it also created Niagara Falls. The Lockport Dolomite forms the ledge over which the falls flow. A rock like shale would have eroded away quickly, but the dolomite is hard enough that it creates a nice hard ledge over which the Niagara Falls can flow and impress us all with its mighty power. Hey Rock Buds, we've covered a lot of the geologic history of the Upper Peninsula. Now let's take a look at the Rock D geologic map of this area and see what we see. The gray color on the left is, of course, Lake Michigan. The gray color on the right is Lake Huron. And each color on the map represents a different rock type. Notice how the rock types form concentric circles between the two lakes. This shows us that we have a basin here and different layers of sediments filled in the basin at different times, and these sediment layers are stacked on top of each other. Here's a side view of how those sediment layers are stacked. Now they're rocks, of course. And you can see the bottom layer is the oldest rocks, and the rocks get younger and younger and younger as you go up to the top. And see the red arrow? We will say that's about Detroit. And if you start in Detroit, you're on the very oldest of the rocks. And if you move toward the center, let's say going toward Mount Pleasant, the rocks get younger and younger and younger as you walk toward the center. So see the pink stuff around the top? That's our Canadian shield rock that's very ancient. The greenish colored rocks below the reddish pinkish color are Ordovician rocks, and they represent sediments that were eroded off of the giant tectonic mountains. This would be the Taconian Orogeny, and are part of the Queenston Delta, which was the main depositional basin for these sediments. See the lightish gray color that kind of circles around on the outside of Lake Michigan and Lake Huron? That is our dolomite, laid down during Silurian time, and it is the layer that covered over the salt stuff and protected and preserved it. The kind of tannish color above the word Michigan represents Devonian period deposits, and that is mostly dolomite and limestone deposits. The green slice right below the word Michigan represents deposits of the Mississippian period, and that would be mostly shale deposits. This stuff was deposited as the Proto-African continent was approaching and pushing down on the Proto-North American continent, creating a depositional basin. Now look at the kind of a turquoisey green area where Saginaw is. That represents Pennsylvanian time deposits, including coal, courtesy of the Taconian Orogeny. And finally, are you as glad as I am? The bluish stuff in the center represents Jurassic deposits associated with the rifting of Pangea. Okay, most excellent rock buds, that's it for the geology of Michigan, Upper and Lower Peninsulas. It was a long one, I know, but thank you so much for watching. And this is your Rock Papa saying to all you fantastic rock buds, happy rock hunting. Papa out.